I want to welcome you all to our joint meeting of March 21, US, and the International Socialism in Canada. My name is Marie, and I'm a member of March 21 in New York City. And we're going to have two outstanding speakers.
So they all got tickets, whatever, and then you're buying flights, like $800 per person.
People just make sure they're muted, please.
Okay. So we have two outstanding speakers with you today, with us, who will discuss what the fall of the brutal regime, the brutal Assad regime means, and how it will change, yet again, the equation in the area. Since the ongoing barbaric genocide in Gaza and the attacks on the West Bank, and the Israeli bombardments and murders in Lebanon and now in Syria, it is becoming clear that Israel is intent on pursuing its long-term plan to annex vast areas of neighboring states. All that with the backing of the Western powers. So we will have plenty of time for discussion after our two speakers finish talking. So first, I will want to introduce our first speakers. That will be Simon Assaf. He's a Lebanese revolutionary socialist based in London, and he's an editor at the public source Lebanon, and has reported extensively on the Middle East. And then we have JANAN here. She's a member of the IS in Canada. She is a PhD student working on racism against Syrian refugees in Turkey. She was an active member of DSİP, which is the Revolutionary Socialist Workers Party in Turkey, before coming to Canada. So now I will hand you over first to Simon, who will speak for about 15 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you for inviting me. It's one of these things I was preparing for tonight's meeting, and I wrote down three notes. One was Palestine, the other was Syria, and then, of course, Lebanon. And it's like, well, which one do we pay attention to? Because things are moving so fast and things have changed so dramatically that really for us to kind of get a little bit of a breath. Hopefully I can give a little bit of context to this. The first thing I wanted to say was we had a meeting yesterday with our Syrian comrades inside of Syria and some of those who are in exile. It's quite an extraordinary meeting because I think this is the first meeting I've ever had with Syrians where we weren't all looking over our shoulders, and there was a sense of, an ability to breathe a little bit and to have quite frank discussions that I have not experienced at all dealing with it. The second part of this was the relief of our Syrian comrades who we've been hiding sneakily in Lebanon for the last 10 years, and that sense of which they had a coming out party in which they can now be politically active without fear of being expelled from Lebanon and end up in one of the Syrian jails. So it was quite interesting because we had actually quite a lot of questions, and there's a few insights I think I want to start with that I think is important for us, for them to share with us generally. The first thing is to get a sense of what happened with the fall of the Assad regime. It seemed at first that you had, if you like, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the main Islamist organization based in Idlib, charging down out of its enclave around Idlib and charging into regime areas, and that they, in a sense, went from town to town, liberating the city. So that's kind of one view of what happened. The second view that people have is that there was some kind of uprising that we picked up from the 2011 Arab Spring, where that was cut off by the repression, the counter-revolution of the Syrian regime. Things just picked up again, and this then came out of the revolution re-emerging. So there's that view. And then there's a third one, which actually is what the Syrian comrades themselves were saying, which was for people outside of the immediate area of the fighting in Damascus, in places like Latakia and Homs and so on, is that although it looked like there was some kind of uprising that took place inside of these cities, actually what happened was that the state simply melted away. People saw the regime troops throw their uniforms on the street, flee the borders and so on, and came out in celebration. So there wasn't, in that sense, a kind of uprising that took place. Yes, Damascus was liberated, if you like, 2 days before the Islamist fighters arrived, but this wasn't so much as an uprising as much as a kind of celebration. Actually, the state had already fallen apart, and this is, I think, quite important that we hold this in context. Now, there are a few differences. There are a few areas where things were slightly different. In Sueda, in the south, which is mainly the Druze area, the Druze are a kind of subsect of one of the Islamic sects, one of the Muslim sects, I should say, with their own kind of structure and so on. A very important area. In terms of it's on the border of it's very close to the occupied territories, but also on the border to Jordan. And this was the town. This was the city which the first Arab uprising begins in 1925-26. So it has quite an important kind of, has an important name in Arab history. In Sueda, you actually had an uprising. There was an uprising in which then you had the regime troops not disappear, but mutiny and join the revolution. So this was one of the places, I think one of the few places where you had what we call a general uprising that stripped the regime of its power. And in other places like Latakia on the coast, normally known as regime heartlands, similarly uprising begins inside a Palestinian camp and then quickly spreads. So you have, if you like, different pictures taking place in different areas. And so it's important that we understand that it's quite uneven. And there's different experiences taking place. Now, we've seen the general. I'm sure people have seen the general footage, not only of the breaking of the regime prisons and so on, but also the vast numbers of people coming out into the streets. And it has that sense, I think, of a lot of people who were involved in the original Syrian uprising in 2011, 2012, that you got a little bit of a flavor of it. But there's some quite key differences. I think it's important that we bear them in mind. The first thing is that generation that first came out into the streets was pretty much wiped out. That's who the 150,000 dead are. Pretty much all the youth who first took to the streets. So that's an important element. Second important element was during the original 2011 Arab Spring, I should call it the Arab Spring uprising, there were organizations that grew up spontaneously and on a local level mainly, called the coordinating committees, that began to take control of different aspects of the state and so on. So you can see then inside of that original uprising, the beginnings, if you like, of what we like to call dual power. I mean, it's not totally dual power, but the sense in which there's a regime power, but there's other organization that is beginning to take root in the basis of society. This no longer exists. So what we have now is not so much an uprising in the classical sense, nor even a finishing of the 2011-2012 uprising, but instead whole sections of the Syrian regime simply going over to the side of the Hayat, Tahrir al-Sham, and that instead of replacing elements of the state, the first thing that the rebels did was to embrace every element of the state and bring it all under the control. So in essence, we have, if you like, the disappearance of the top layer of the Syrian state, alongside various henchmen and so on. The freeing of the prisoners is very important. The end of fear, that's all very important. But actually, the state itself remaining pretty much they're trying to rebuild it according to how it was before, in terms of the structure of the army, in terms of the structure of the judiciary, in terms of the structure of calling the police back, and so on. So there has been a fundamental change inside of Syria, but this is almost simply on a spiritual level, that this hasn't gone through in the way we expected it to do in 2011. So we have, if you like, a situation which is, I think, quite tenuous for the new regime. And I think it's really interesting looking at the laws in which they are enacting. They are resuscitating laws from 1957, 1958. So from the first early early part of the original Syrian revolution, when they got rid of the French, that point at which the Syrian bourgeoisie take control of the revolution. They bring through a whole series of laws about land ownership and all this kind of stuff. And what Hayat has done has simply gone back to these laws rather than to any kind of real revolutionary change. So in that sense, what we have, if you like, in Syria is a incomplete revolution and a revolution itself that as we understand it, as kind of ground its gears and it isn't really challenging from it. So we have, if you like, a regime change in the same way that you had with the fall of Ben Ali or Hosni Mubarak, in that they got rid of the top one, but now they have new people coming through. What are the politics of these? It's Syrian nationalists. That is, it's about building a strong Syrian state. And you see everything that they've done, Hayat, since then has been involved in easing relations with the West, with calming down the panic amongst the upper echelons of Syrian society, and really drawing in the old, what we call the Sunni bourgeoisie that made an important alliance with the Assad regime and simply now swapped over. So if you like, there's dramatic change, but at the same time, the dramatic change, but at the same time, very conservative. So we have, if you like, almost like a Muslim Brotherhood style government sort of coming in into Syria. There's a couple of things I just want to jump in now, because I know there's been a lot of stuff said about, this is like the new Jordan, or this is like new Saudi Arabia and so on. And we have to be very careful with that kind of thing. This is like the new Iraq. No, it's not. No one liberated the Syrians but the Syrians themselves. So there is a dynamic there. It's not a regime imposed by the West. In fact, it's a regime the West is trying to find a way of working with, or trying to draw them in. Is the way in which the Israelis have been attempting to provoke the new regime into an immediate war with it. This is why the Israeli tanks have been going deeper and deeper into areas of Syria. They're trying to provoke a fight, because the Israelis understand something that I think a lot of other people are missing, is that JANAN and the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham actually come from al-Qaeda, actually represent quite a radical section of the Islamists. JANAN himself was in Camp Bucca. He was one of the US prisoners during the Iraq War. So where they're coming from is quite terrifying, I think, for the Israelis. At the same time, they're trying to change their image, if you like, to try and soften it. And there's an understandable reason for. There's no way Syria can go to war now with anyone. I don't know if you've seen the footage, but whole areas of the country are completely wrecked. I was talking to a Lebanese colleague today who lost his house in the south, and I was saying it seems strange for us, because you can go from Gaza to South Lebanon through the Bekaa Valley to Damascus, Homs, Hama, Aleppo, and all the towns on there, and it's just everything's demolished in the wars that we've had over the last 10 years. So Syria is in an extraordinarily weak situation, and so this attempt to provoke, there is an attempt to provoke the new government into a war with Israel, and Israel would be quite happy to smash them up. So there is that sense in which we have to be a little bit patient to see what emerges, in which direction it goes. But just to remind people, well, we don't need to remind, I'm not sure people were alive then, but in the first 2 years of Gamal Abdel Nasser's reign in Egypt, when he took over, was one in which he was desperately trying to make deals with the West. It wasn't until he had no other option that then he begins to move in a much more anti-Western way. And it's interesting reading stuff from the time, especially the Algerian Revolution, in which they complain bitterly about Gamal Abdel Nasser not helping the Arab nationalists in Algeria. And so we have to be a little bit patient and understand the context of which Syria is rising. But there is one element of this which I think is really, which I find really heartening, which is in a way the parallel when Lebanon emerged from its civil war in 1990. The deal that ended the Lebanese civil war is horrible on every level. It's known as the Ta'if Agreement. That's horrible, really terrible, really terrible. But there's one thing it did do. it opened up a space for the development of opposition. It opened up the space for people being able to step out without fear of dying, without fear of torture, without fear of disappearance, and so on. And in the 10 years that followed it, 10, 15 years that followed the end of the civil war, we saw the re-emergence of working class movements inside of Lebanon. And so this is what we're looking for in Syria. And this is what a lot of the comrades are really excited about, this sense in which you can then, we have this tremendous atmosphere in Syria. There is a bit of a memory of the coordinating committees and so on. And so in this sense, we need to, they say we need to rebuild the structure of Syrian society so that unions can begin to develop and so on. So there is that sense in which there is a line of march for them, understanding very much the really hard situation they are in. So that is just a few comments about Syria. Now I've got a few comments about Lebanon as well, which is this, which is the war, the axis of resistance style war, the missiles rather than the masses. The fighting in the south has been, there's two elements of it. The first element of it is this, which is the Israelis attempted to create divisions, sow divisions inside of Lebanese society by saying, if anyone outside of Hezbollah areas or Shia Muslim areas gives refuge to Shia people, then we will bomb you. And we saw actually the big difference between this war and 2006 was this war, they were hitting Christian towns very far from the front line because the Christian towns were hosting Shia refugees from the south and from South Beirut. And the Israelis said, if you do this,
just to let you know, sorry.
Okay, so the Israelis attempt at this point to put massive pressure inside of Lebanese society in order to break up the solidarity failed miserably, absolutely failed, to the extent that people said, I would rather die. I'm here in this Christian town, 150 miles away from anything. We've allowed the Shia family to find refuge here. If the Israelis come and bomb us, then let it be so. And this was quite an important moment for Lebanon, because it's a moment in which people stood shoulder to shoulder, and that's quite important, because what came out of the war, even though it was really hard, I think, on Lebanon, what came out of the war was actually the sense in which this solidarity with the resistance, solidarity with the Lebanese people amongst each other was extraordinarily strong. So that's a very important thing. However, we have to say the strategy of the missiles, the strategy of the axis of resistance has turned into a bit of a disaster. We've lost most of the south, has been demolished. The Israelis claim something like 3,500 Hezbollah fighters have been killed. I think that's probably accurate from what I'm gathering. That actually militarily Hezbollah got quite badly beaten, and the sense in which now Hezbollah feels very much trapped now inside of Lebanon. Its whole base, its social base, has been very, very badly attacked. And at the same time, the sense in which Syria's disappeared, Iran's disappearing, and so this sense of isolation that is coming in. So again, we have, if you like, a whole bunch of different forces playing with each other and emerging, but at the same time, we have this agency that is there also, which is the mass of the popular people, what people are doing, how they're helping each other, and that is actually quite strong, both in Syria and Lebanon. And very finally, just to put it, I think in a wider context, really early on in the Syrian revolution, we were warning at the time from Lebanon. We were warning. We thought people were going on, the big dangers of America, the big dangers of this, the big dangers. We were saying no, the big warning is Turkey. And if you understand, if you see who the biggest winner in this war so far, I mean, the Israelis have seized land. The Israelis have done a whole bunch of things, but in so doing, they've destroyed their reputation. They're very much the outcasts of the world. They should be the outcasts of the world, but I think in a lot of people's mind, they're outcasts of the world. Actually, the real winner in this is Turkey. In Turkish influence now over Syria, an extra 20 million people. But I thought what was quite interesting was that when Erdogan, who's the president of Turkey, was doing a speech, I think yesterday evening or this morning, people in his crowd were chanting, "When are you going to take us to Jerusalem?" So the expectations, I think, on Erdogan, on Turkey, is that now the Israelis will have to face the Turkish army and the Turkish military in Syria. So there's a whole bunch of expectations that are taking place. But if we were to just kind of summarize this like this, well, we all spoke about the retreat of US imperialism in the Middle East, the disasters of Afghanistan, disasters inside of Iraq, the way in which the US has moved its base of operation from the Persian Gulf to Lebanon, and how they did that. Obviously, it was building the second largest embassy in the world, which is the US embassy in Lebanon. It's their second largest embassy in the world. They take this very seriously, and that they've drawn a line in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is why the Israelis went over every red line that the Biden administration gave them. So imperialism has been in a retreat for quite a while now. And what we've had is the rise of regional powers, and the regional powers becoming more and more assertive. And the main regional powers, of course, are the Israelis, now the Turks, who are the big winners, and also Saudi Arabia and Iran, who Iran now are the big losers. So in this absence of kind of dominant US imperialism, what we're getting is regional powers beginning to play an imperial role. And I think one of the Syrians put it really well. He said, for the Turkish construction industry, this is an amazing time. They will be rebuilding Syria using Turkish capital. So when we talk about imperialism, we also talk about the export of capital. You understand that what we have now, in the same way that Turkey exported its capital to northern Iraq, and we're able to reconstruct northern Iraq and so on. We can see that now in the way in which Turkish capital will now spill over into Syria, and Syria will become, if you like, I don't want to use the colony, it's a horrible word, but a protectorate, if you like, under Turkish influence, but more importantly, with huge amounts of Turkish money now coming in the reconstruction. So we begin to see the way in which Turkish capital played its role in northern Iraq, now beginning to play its role in Syria. And of course, this changes changes the dynamics, I think, of the sub-imperial powers inside of the region. And I just very finally want to finish with this, which is a lot of people are seeing this as a massive defeat for the Palestinians and for the resistance. And we have to say there is a setback here, and the setback isn't the loss of the Assad regime. Quite clearly, I think, during the war in Lebanon, more and more people from Hezbollah supporters kept highlighting the fact that the Israelis were able to destroy their secret stores of weaponry really easily. It now transpires that the Assad regime had been selling these secrets, and documents beginning to emerge. Whether this is true or not, it's a conspiracy theory. It doesn't really matter to us. What matters is that this was the perception before Assad fell, and it was now the perception very much that the so-called axis of resistance was actually constantly undermining the resistance, which means actually there's going to be huge amounts of ideological confusion inside of Lebanon, inside of Syria, and so on. And inside of that, we hope to be able to we hope to be able to build. And the second, just the very final part, is this, which is, the idea that we can take on a power like Israel militarily, backed by the US, backed at one point.
Simon, I'm so sorry, I muted you by mistake. You're still muted. I can't unmute you. Sorry.
Sorry, just to say the sheer scale of the Israeli military, backed by the US, backed by German warships at one point, were helping them out. The British Air Force, the Jordanian Air Force, the Saudi Air Force, everyone was joining in to ensure that Israel won this war. And for Hezbollah to be able to, Hezbollah and Hamas, alongside Yemen, to be able to confront this on a military level was really, it's always going to be a very difficult ask. The real emphasis, I think, has to always be on the global movement and what the global movement can do. And in the week in which we saw lots of people saw as a defeat with the fall of the Assad regime, the Israelis closed down their embassy inside of Ireland. And you think, oh, that's really important. The Norwegians beginning to say they're refusing to play football. We've had quite a lot of attacks on arms manufacturers in Britain. They're beginning to close down their arms production inside of Britain. Banks like Barclays Bank beginning to close down, remove their investment in Israeli firms. So that there is, in a sense, this global movement is much more critical because Israel is backed by superpowers. And because Israel is backed by superpowers, just to go toe to toe with them in a slogging match is always going to be really difficult. And for me, the big question now isn't so much what's happened in Syria, but how this is going to impact on Jordan and how this is going to impact on Egypt. So is this going to reignite? We don't know yet. Is this going to reignite the Arab Spring? Is this to mark the change? Because we could have quite a sophisticated analysis of it, but in Egypt, the only demonstrations that have taken place have been Syrians celebrating the fall of Bashar al-Assad. This is the only thing that we've seen in terms of big demonstrations taking place in Egypt. So we begin to see actually how this will feed into the regional change. Right, thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was really good. You covered a lot in a very short time. I've already introduced JANAN, but you're going to be next for the next 15 to 20 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not easy, not to overlap with what has been said so far. So apologies, like if there is a repetition, but I will try to also focus on a little bit on the Turkish involvement, from the beginning, a bit maybe more in greater detail. But I think there are certain things that comes up in the discussions, and then we should equip ourselves as members of the international socialist tendency against those arguments. One of them is about basically sectarian nature of the regime and the sectarian, accusations against the Syrian revolution from the get-go. One thing I think we should keep in mind is sectarianism in the Middle East, although in the near history, we dated back to the invasion of Iraq, occupation of Iraq, and the system that was built, after when the US was trying to actually craft a government using Shia resistance against the Sunnis, and then forming a government based on basically sectarian lines, which is clumsily mimicking, what was happening in Lebanon. We have always seen that as a seed, that will amplify in the region because it is an imperialist tactic, which is rooted in the long history, even in the history of the French mandate in Syria and aftermath. So that's, first of all, once the imperialist forces and the regimes use sectarian tactics, it's usually likely that a portion of the mass uprisings use a language that is sectarian against these regimes, but also there are always forces that defy that sectarian rhetoric and try to build cross-sectarian solidarity, which was the first stage of the revolutionary uprising in Syria and elsewhere. And I think this is very important because in the coming days, I think both our comrades in Syria and the broader forces who try to revive the committees, the councils, and the people's solidarity will be making a huge effort to build those bridges and provide basically a program, maybe a transitional program, as the statement of our comrades in Syria has already outlined, like a cross, like a sectarian alliance, to build something democratic, something that can be accountable partly to people that this is a wide topic, and we can definitely talk about the Syrian regime, which is usually which was considered by the, unfortunately, a growth, like segments of the Western or secular, it was a sectarian structure. Hafez Assad, who took power in 1970, but who was involved from 1963 in Syrian politics. Their sectarian crafting of the state, military, bureaucracy, and everything, alongside their alliances with the Sunni bourgeoisie, definitely created that structure, and that structure is being dismantled now, and the dismantling of that should not come at the expense of once privileged sects, but it should be a cross-sectarian struggle. And I think this is something that our comrades already is paying attention to, and we trust in the power of the masses in that sense. And the second issue that is very important, I think, is this Palestinian, Simon has extensively, addressed that, but it's some points to remember for us is Assad regime does not have definitely a record of pro-Palestinian resistance. When you see especially certain proofs, evidence in history, we can see that even more clearly. It is cited a lot, but maybe I should just say that when the Golan Heights in 1967 was being invaded by Israel, the defense minister back then was Hafez al-Assad, and basically he ordered the withdrawal of the forces even before Israel, literally took it up. So it can be said a military bad strategy, but it had long-term consequences. And when Syria lost 1973 October war, we again see a year later a kind of a mutual non-aggression agreement between the states, and from the Palestinian refugees, and their political activism was one thing. Now the prisons are being, you see peoples are being freed, and then they say thousands of Palestinians, revolutionaries are part of the people who are being freed, and more than 3,000 are missing actually. And the Yarmouk camp, which housed a lot of Palestinians, was destroyed by the counter-revolution after the uprising started. That's what we know. And we also know that in the 1980s, when in 1980, when the war started between Iran and Iraq, basically Syrian regime supported Iran against Iraq back then. And this was not a anti-imperialist or struggle of any kind, but it was an alliance again with another imperialist force in the region. And in 1990, Syria joined the US-led coalition against Iraq, actually. And this is another indication of the calculations that the old regime did. So we should be sure that Assad regime in no way was an anti-imperialist regime. It was a regime mostly focused on protecting its own privileges, protecting the very oppressive state structure intact, and they did the fatal moves, to protect that at the expense of, they say, 500,000 Syrian people being killed, and more than maybe 7 million people, 8 million people to be displaced, the majority of whom also took refuge in Turkey, So that's another point that I thought we need to clarify. Now, when we come to the revolution and uprising and the aftermath of that, we know that after Tunisia, Libya, and then Egypt, so we saw Syrian uprising, but very soon it has become the center of counter-revolution, actually. The Egyptian coup also kind of pursued that counter-revolutionary violence that the Syrian regime put in place. And we know in 2012, just 1 year after the uprising started, Iran was involved. In 2013, Hezbollah was involved on the side of the regime. In 2015, So we know that, you know, it was like 2/5 of the territory in Syria was now not controlled by the regime itself. And then 2015, Russian state was involved in that, and they had naval base, you know, like it is a strategic location for Russian imperialism as well. So and Turkish involvement on top of that, both, you know, like providing some sort of a logistic support for the I think transforming Free Syrian Army back then, and housing all the diplomatic meetings, you know, like that is about a possible power transition, or let's say like political revolution, also made Turkey so much within the picture from the beginning. And we also know that the Western powers have been, usually they say that we are fighting against ISIS, and they have been involved. At one point we knew, including Canada, most of the imperialist powers actually were bombing Syria, right? So from that actually demise, I have to say, when the regime was not already controlling the majority of the area, when there were different political powers, we cannot say like a total restoration of the old regime. And this new offensive started by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, on November 27th, which ended up Assad regime, you know, like to fall, and Assad and his family fleeing in December 6th, on December 6th, actually can be seen as part of the, like this long progress of the of events in this chain of events. And the analysis that highlight the significance of like Russian like military weakening in Syria, because its power or its forces being transferred to Ukraine, because I think imperialism now has been fighting in multiple fronts. Like Palestine is one of them, Ukraine is another scene, and there is definitely a struggle within inter-imperial rivalry even, right, to keep all the fronts they are fighting as they were in this one. Now, I was reading about Georgia. Even in Georgia, right, you can see uprisings. It's like a conflict between, again, the European Union, US, you know, like kind of politics versus, you know, like Russian influence and the oligarchs and everything. And the masses try to navigate their own destiny when this inter-imperial rivalry is happening. The easy answer, therefore, sometimes for some of the left, just seeing this as a, oh, right, US imperialism and Western imperialism is the big imperialism. And then we should be just against that. Like even when we think we are protecting the oligarchs in power, who are corrupt, who are stealing from people, who are impoverishing people. This has never been our position as the tendency, because we for us, the real change cannot come just from the ideas from get-go, like as Hal Draper, I think, very well put, like for Marxists, the social revolution is essential if we want to change the political system into a way that we have workers' democracy. We see kind of a societal retransformation of the society. So we don't, you know, like have any faith in any of those imperialist camps, but we have faith in people and their ability to actually formulate their demands. And for that, of course, our presence, the presence of our ideas, theory is important. And the history in the Middle East shows that actually, unfortunately, the leftist ideas within the movement. This is also the price that we have been paying because of the failures of the old Ba'ath regimes, you know, like in different areas, basically diminishing, you know, influence of the left. Because once you kind of identify with the oppressive regimes, you know, the credibility of the ideas within society goes down. But each revolutionary epoch opens again new opportunities for us. And now we see an opening. So fall of Assad regime in the first place is creating opportunities actually for the revolutionaries, for more democratic ideas. So there's nothing to I mean, of course, mourn about that. And there's a lot of reason to kind of join the joy or celebration of people, no matter which, like strand of politics they were. Globally, we have witnessed, like how people were celebrating it, and we have joined that, not like naively, knowing that those people also know, everybody knows, like the challenges ahead, and now the time is basically how to make it more democratic and how internationally we can give that support. If you are worried about Assad regime's fall and mourning behind that, there is no conversation that you can have with the Syrian masses, like that line is that conversation is closed. But first of all, acknowledge the harm and then, celebrate. There is something else to say. And what is to say from my end, I mean, at least, is this. So like Turkish state, which is we have in power Erdogan, his name is well known. His party is Justice and Democracy Party. The acronym is AKP in Turkish, and they have been in power since 2002, right? So, and his presidency now is enjoying, like a third term in Turkey. So definitely we have seen a government very ambitious in its sub-imperial projects or objectives, and definitely at the heart of that. And sub-imperialist regimes are like spineless, right? I mean, because whoever they think their interest lies in as the state, as capital or clusters of capital, they align with that. Turkey is an active member of NATO, but at the same time, we see for a long time that there's definitely a flirtation with Russia, or, like using its own regional, like power to leverage. And this is nothing, there is nothing about like pro-people about there, but what we trust, as Simon says, whatever the government does, there is some kind of an expectation from the constituencies that put pressure on the leaderships, right? So when you very bravely say, I'm like, Israel is this and that, so there's a pressure, like that holds you accountable, or at least seeks you hold you accountable. So that's kind of the thing that we trust in, but we know that it is corrupt. And now they see Syria basically a new site of investment for Turkish capital, because Turkish capital also over those 20 years flourished around energy projects, construction projects, and the faction of capital that this government has been in very close alliance with, I think, and also gathered the rest of the factions around, has been around this kind of economic investment. So their political economy is definitely sees in Syria an opportunity. Secondly,
you're at 15 minutes, comrade, just to let you know.
Yeah, okay. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And the second important point, I think, is for Turkey, from the foundation, as a remnant of Ottoman, like empire, their greed for larger territory and keeping whatever territory is left has been their kind of almost like they call it like state survival. It's so big that they denied Kurdish people even the right to speak their languages freely for a very long time. Thousands of places have changed names, and they have been imprisoned, and their armed wing, like PKK, has been fighting against the Turkish state since 1980s. And before that, we had seen many Kurdish uprisings. And in Syria, once the north and northeast, what is called by Kurdish comrades as Rojava, has been under the control of the Kurdish forces. So Syria also meant to tame, to control Kurdish politics within Turkey, which is called Turkish Kurdistan, North Kurdistan, and also using, like the fighting forces in such a way that they would annex to Turkish nationalist agenda. That's why what is called like now Syrian National Army, a difference from the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has been used almost like a proxy to fight against the Kurdish forces, which is another danger. So and our comrades, again, in their statement, writes it clearly. Definitely, this is something that should be avoided. And the Kurdish initiatives, their leadership, their political existence in Syria should be integrated into the regime, like that will come up out of that, if it is going to have resemblance of some democracy in it. Otherwise, there will be another, definitely, like a national liberation war going on in Syria, in Turkey, and we might expect to see, like more bloodshed and, suffering on the side of the Kurdish people. That's another issue. Turkish military should definitely withdraw from Syria and then leave the Syrian people the right to determine their own future with incorporation of the Kurdish forces as well. So that's another important point. And lastly, that I want to say, one thing that we are seeing maybe in Northern America, in Canada and US, to a lesser extent, but in Europe and in Turkey, definitely in a very emphasized way, is the return of the refugees, or forced, like repatriation of the refugees after this issue. In Turkey, around 4 million Syrian refugees, to 3 million of them have temporary protection status in Turkey. They don't have refugee status. And now the opposition, the secular opposition in Turkey, is now pushing the government, you should send them back. And like in Germany, like they refroze the asylum applications. Not just that, Britain, Austria, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Italy, Ireland, Netherlands, Greece, Belgium, Croatia, Switzerland, Poland, and Finland, and now Turkey. Now they are freezing asylum applications, and they are trying to think of ways how to send refugees back in a place where there is no certainty about future, or politics. This is now the front of the growing far right forces, and the center right and sometimes center left definitely gives seed to that rhetoric. This is something, again, we should be fighting against. Far right is trying to set the agenda over immigration, and we should be fighting back, saying that refugees are welcome. They are here to stay. No forced, repatriation. Or even if they do it under the guise of voluntary return, most of the time they violate. And Turkish state is not devoid of that thing. It is also doing the same. So we should show solidarity with Syrian people, both in their places where they seek asylum, and both in their own country where they will try to actually create some bottom-up democratic society, however, maybe weak or nucleus it is. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to everyone for a very thorough discussion. David also put a final question in the chat about how the electronic intifada backs the campus view, and if this is important or not. So I'm going to bring Simon back up. Simon, you have 3 to 5 minutes, more on the 3-minute. But yeah, to sum up.
Okay,
Thank you.
So very quickly, Samir, if you, we're ahead of you, I think, probably about 20 years, in that we came out of horrible civil war in which the left was completely and utterly annihilated. And the deal that ended that war, the Taif agreement, was horrible deal. Sectarianism, they brought it back. There was a bit of rebalancing, so on. And there were kind of two arguments that kind of emerged out of that. The first was that you have this fight between the secular and the sectarian. And we're seeing this emerge again in Syria. In Lebanon, when it emerged, the people who were arguing for secularism were pretty much on the right. I know that sounds weird, but it was pretty much on the right. They used it, if you like, as a way, a Trojan horse, if you like, in order to get in. And actually what they meant was, we need to be pro-US. So these are some of the debates, I think, coming up I'm beginning to see coming up inside of Syria. The old regime elements now beginning to coalesce around this idea that they want this, the secularism versus the sectarianism. So it's a very big discussion and a very nuanced discussion. And the only thing I'll say about is actually what happened on the ground inside of Lebanon is more important, which was it allowed the working class to recover from being split up into little cantons ruled by militias. And a similar thing happened in Syria, local warlords and all that kind of stuff. And the beginning of the re-emergence of class struggle in Lebanon is what shaped and has shaped the country up until the point of the 2019 uprising, which was cross-sectarian uprising, which was the uprising of the working class and so on. What happened was that the working class were able to rebuild. As they were able to rebuild, left was able to rebuild inside of that. And in terms of what we will say to the Syrians to do is you have to build the unions, you have to build, if possible, revive the coordinating committees, if possible, attempt to get some kind of local democracy going. These are all questions that are in the air. What we're doing specifically right now is publishing our newspaper openly inside of Syria. So this is another good thing, beginning to group together the more radical elements of the left into some kind of organization. So we have an opening to do this. We had an opening to do this in Lebanon until we supported the Syrian uprising. And I'll tell you, we suffered horrendously when we supported Syrian uprising. Our comrades were beaten. They beat the hell out of them. They crippled a couple of comrades. I mean, it was horrible in order to survive this. And this was the hands of the Ba'athist regime, irrespective of all the support we gave Hezbollah, irrespective of everything. So there is that sense in which there is an opening. The opening can only happen if we build the social forces that can do it, and this is crucial. The second point I want to quickly make is that an out really for the campus. I have an out for the campus, which works quite well for me, which is Hamas supported the Syrian revolution. If you support the resistance inside of Palestine, then essentially you're also supporting an organization that supported the Syrian revolution. They were involved in the Syrian revolution, and very interesting interviews coming out from the Hamas people right after the fall of the Assad regime. One of the senior Hamas people, before he had to flee the country, going around saying, you have to make a compromise, you have to make a deal. This is really, you can't fight against you people and so on. And Hamas becoming the enemy of Syria. And I'll tell you this, it was only a couple of months before October 7th, there was a final reconciliation between Hamas and the Syrian regime, which was organized by Hezbollah. So actually they had been completely on the opposite side. So if you support Hamas, then by de facto, you can also then support the Syrian revolution. I think that's the way out. And just like on a personal note, just on 1976, because I was young, but I was involved in 1976. So was my dad. We fought on the right. We fought against the Palestinians and we fought against the left. And I remember my father coming back from one battle and saying his shock and suddenly finding Syrian artillery arriving to support the Christian phalangist, the fascist forces. He said, oh, these people are enemy. And suddenly we were looking, oh, why these Syrian artillery? What were the Syrian artillery coming to do? They were coming to destroy a camp called Tel Zatar, which was strategically really important. And if Tel Zatar, once Tel Zatar fell, it fell because of the Syrian intervention. And so from that very moment, there has been this hatred, I think, many people inside of Lebanon of the Syrian regime, and Hafiz al-Assad never bought this stuff. And for Hezbollah, first emerges in the early 1980s in a fight against Syria. So they have an uprising against Syrian influence inside of Lebanon. Then what happens is Syria then makes an agreement with Iran and so on, and then they start to help them out and so on. But it's like really important to understand that Syria's always been this. It's always been this black cloud, I think, over Lebanon. Finally, I want to finish with this: that you can look at any statement made by the Hayat. al-Sham. You can make any of these statements, and you can make any kind of plot out any kind of feature. But if you fail to notice and fail to take into consideration one important point, the special nature of the Israeli state. The Israeli state is an expansionist state. So even if you had the nicest people, the most pro-Western people, the most cowardly people in charge inside of Syria, Israel's still going to steal their land, which they're doing now. And so irrespective of what direction I think Hayat want to take Syria, the question always is going to be the question about Israel, the question what Israel is doing. And it's not like in a sense, making parallels with other parts of the world, is constantly, because of what Israel is and the very nature of Israel itself, means actually there will have to be a conflict. They have no choice in it, because the Israelis are now seizing dams, they're seizing important rivers. These are crucial, not only in Lebanon but also in Syria. So they'll have to face it. And interesting, the first anti-Syrian demonstration, where does it take place? The first anti-Israeli demonstration in which they confronted the Israeli troops, it was in the south. It was in Sweden, the birthplace of the revolution, birthplace of the Arabs. So again, they're ahead of everyone else, and they're already beginning to see that. So it's very important to remember it's not just that they want to be anti-Israel, they want to be anti-imperialist. They have no choice but to be forced into this be forced into position. My very final point, I swear to God, this will be my final point, which is we're witnessing the collapse of liberal Zionism, and this is, I think, the big defeat that's inside the Israeli victory, because the collapse of liberal Zionism isn't simply taking place inside of Israel, but it's also on a global scale. And this is really important, and to understand the weight of this, because we have so much faith and put so much by the self-activity of the mass of people, the masses, not the missiles, that we understand how important this is. Ideological shifts, political shifts that are taking place, actually beginning to isolate Israel more and more, to the extent now that the Israeli government, this present Israeli government, is using anti-Arab discrimination, the right to arrest and so on. They're expanding this now to include Jewish citizens, that is, to include opposition forces within Israel. Israel is becoming more and more fragile and more violent, and inside of all these victories, you see the big global defeat that is Israel. And I always point people to watch the film The Battle for Algiers, and The Battle for Algiers is a really good film for this reason. It's actually the armed struggle lost. They were crushed. They were crushed in Algiers, and they were crushed everywhere else. And the final part of the film is a beautiful point where all the masses come out. Right? Just to give you context, the masses came out on general strike in these huge pro-independence demonstrations that I'd never seen before, because Charles de Gaulle was making a tour of Algeria in which he was celebrating the complete crushing of the FLN. So we always talk about the masses as being fundamental, and the big issue I have with the campists is they don't think the masses have any kind of agency. That there isn't this great aspiration that's coming out of Syria at the moment. There isn't this great hope of wanting something, how important that is. And they just point to places like, oh, look what happened in Libya. What happened in Libya was an intervention of the West. Look what happened in Iraq. What happened in Iraq is an invasion of the, Iraqis weren't coming out, kissing the hands of the American troops in the way they are with the Islamist fighters coming from Idlib. And I think that aspiration, of the people is so important, and something that I think we're going to build up. And I will finish on this point, which is our comrade from Syria said something very good. He goes, at the end of the day, we push the regime over with our finger, right? That actually it was so hollowed out. What hollowed out this regime was the revolution, was the uprising. The counter-revolution destroyed any chance that they can recover. I always thought the Syrians should have looked to Egypt to see the way out of it, rather than just demolishing half the country. Actually, there was there was another route for them. But the aspiration of the masses is very crucial for us, and this opening is something that we're absolutely grasping for, because for all my life I've lived under the shadow of the Syrian regime, and it's really weird now. It's really weird to have open discussions with Syrians. It's really weird, and I think that there's plenty to be optimistic about, especially if you're looking at its impact on Jordan and its impact on Egypt, which we don't know yet what will happen, but I think it's important. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, comrades, for your time.
Thank you, Simon. Hopefully we can bring you back too in a couple months to do that wrap up. I hate to put time constraints on you and JANAN because of how great your analyses are, but JANAN, if you can bring us home here.
Yeah, sure. I will try to be brief. I think Simon kind of answered some of the questions already, but I will try to give brief answers on my end. So what would I do if I were in Syria, fighting as a revolutionary? I would definitely try to build organization tried to, like find places where the trade unions are kind of reorganizing, activating. And I think the Jewish community in Sweden, who also was active in 2023 in the form of uprisings, they actually organized uprisings before this HTS, offensive even. So I would try to connect with them. I would try to, could kind of resurrect all the people who were active in the initial phase of the revolution, whoever is there, and try to organize the young generation and push the existing political system, to put more pressure and to fight against chauvinism, to fight against sectarianism, and to create a like a worker movement, so probably that would be what I would do. And another thing is like with this campism thing, so interesting, because in the third world, the quote unquote third world, of course, when we were saying that the enemy is at home, as revolutionary socialists, to point to the fact that even if they have rhetorically have like anti-imperialist language, like they are oppressive, they are pro-capital, they are serving the ruling class interests, so we should topple them down. They didn't have much resonance for the Stalinist left back then. They were so much okay with realigning with the existing, power in the home. So that slogan was kind of our slogan from Leninism. And we were always saying the enemy is at home at the same time. It's not enough to fight against US imperialism. You have to fight against the regime as well. We were saying that. But now this slogan is a little bit inverted and used in a weird way. Like if you are in Canada, in US, in the West, if you just fight against your countries, your states, like military ambition, you don't have to say anything about Syrian uprising people. It's okay not to, to be anti-Assad or, like anti-regime, which is kind of like, forgive me for saying this, but it's kind of abuse of the slogan itself, because like enemy is at home. Yeah, our definitely primary duty is to fight against the state and its imperialist network wherever we are located. But at the same time, when there are people on the street, we never shut our eyes, elsewhere in the world. Whenever the US, intervenes in Cuba, we say hands off. But at the same time, when Cuban people are on the streets, we don't keep quiet about that. We say whenever it's like imperialist states threatens Iran, we say hands off. But when Iranian people are organizing and a revolutionary struggle, we say, of course, that regime, which is oppressive, which has a lot of blood in its hand, should be toppled down by the people. There is no question about that. When there is Venezuelan, like an intervention by the US, we say hands off. But when Venezuelan people themselves organize themselves against the like Chavez or Maduro regime later or whatever, we take a position. So that's ununderstandable, I think, to me. One thing is fighting against your own state and its imperialist ambitions and its connections with the global imperialist network. The other thing is actually always being on the side of the masses and the people wherever they are fighting. Second thing, of course, this unions issue, I always seen when I've seen like Arab Spring, like we try to analyze in what places revolution somewhat, like got some results and where it was more oppressed by the counter-revolutionary forces relatively in a faster pace. And Egypt and Tunisia, we have seen general strike organization of unions. In Egypt, there were over 2,000 strikes happening when the revolution was happening. In Syria, unfortunately, the whole process, I think, to a certain extent, Peter's point, like sounds right to me. The process of, annexing unions to the state, basically turning them into apparatus of the state, and then hollowing them out, and it was one of the reasons why we, unfortunately, could not see like a economic, the power of the workers coming from there being structurally in the productive sectors were also prevented. And this is one of the factors. The second factor, I think, in revolutionary uprising, it's the military, right? So when we have seen a sectarian military and the defectors from Syrian army did not amount to a level to paralyze the Syrian army itself. That was another factor. And Egypt, I think the worker struggle was there, but the military, again, was not dismantled. So these, factors are combined. And now there's an opening for the trade union movement revival as well, I believe. But of course, it's a country, the population of Syria before revolution was 21 million. And almost half of its population have been displaced, right? So we are also talking about a place that have seen historically atrocities, like a worst kind of, violence. And I think Simon made this point, but I will emphasize it, maybe finish it here. What is called as this axis of resistance, always the politics around that has been so vague, right? When the latest genocidal episode committed by the state of Israel started, there was huge confusion among the ranks of the left, I think everywhere, about Hamas. Do you remember that? They were basically giving it as an excuse, they just took time for them, to formulate what they were thinking. Whereas our tendency super quickly, we kind of put our voice there. That's why I think wherever we have big organizations, we organize big movements at the same time with that slogan and clarity. Now, the same thing is about this Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Of course, they are not same and comparable in a way, but I think that it's so easily, they fall in that trap. And Lenin said something, I think, very important when the revolution was happening, he was like, whoever expects a pure revolution will expect forever, will wait forever. Revolutionary episodes have never been tidy episodes. So yes, true, we are realistic. We see what forces we have, what is the situation, what is the leadership. We say that, but at the same time, we never wait until our forces are ready, because some certain things are not in our control. If you leave the history doesn't have a vacuum in itself. Forces will be there. So you should be actively participating in that. However your forces are, if you want to be big and influential in the movements, internationally, regionally, whatever. And our purpose is actually creating the international movement of the working class. And if you miss the link, actually you become campus then. You miss the connection with the workers in a certain geography, and we shouldn't do that. And so maybe finishing the whole conversation with a note of hope, this is an opening. The Palestinian struggle, Palestinian resistance, which have not been defeated by the Israel, despite its, massive superiority in terms of arms and everything, gives us hope. And now we should think how to mobilize a regional and global solidarity with that movement, and how to energize the Syrian working class again in solidarity with Palestine, and, in the best interest of the class in Syria itself, so that should be our purpose. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to our speakers. It's just really empowering to see all of you smack dab in the middle of the holidays to have this important discussion. And so on behalf of the International Socialists and Marx 20, I feel I have dual citizenship. So on behalf of the International Socialists and Marx 21, thank you for joining us. Thank you all for your work and comradeship throughout the year. Really looking forward to linking arms with you in resistance in 2025. So happy holidays and see you in the new year, comrades.